Game day here on Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. We'll also hear today from Collyn Taylor, our staff writer with GamecockCentral.com. And we'll get to look at the Texas A&M perspective today from Mark Passwaters from AggieYell.com. Glad to have you along, everybody. Wes, how you doing today, bud?
I'm good, man. Another game day. Season's flying by, dude. Week 5. It's hard to believe. It seems like it just started, huh?
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it goes by every year. So, Wes, the Gamecocks with a long road trip today to College Station, playing at Kyle Field, 7:30 tonight against Texas A&M. And this is a very intriguing matchup to me, Wes. You know, both teams come in with the same record, 3-1, but the Gamecocks obviously really struggled last week with Louisiana Tech, shut out for 3 quarters, rallied to score 17 in the 4th and win that ball game. And A&M, you know, I'm wondering if they got on track last week. I know they gave up a ton of points in that overtime win over Arkansas, but, you know, 3 weeks ago, Wes, when A&M lost to UCLA and blew that huge lead, you know, it looked like the wheels could come off of their season very quickly, but they've regrouped to win 3 in a row, and they got this freshman quarterback, Collyn Mond, that played very well against Arkansas, and I feel like A&M's on the uptick.
Yeah, they are. You know, I think, wow, you look at this program, man, it's kind of, I don't know what the words are, like it seems like there's always some type of drama around Texas A&M. There's always something in the headlines around Texas A&M. But, hey, at the same time, man, those guys have won. You know, Will Muschamp made the point that someone, you know, has won pretty much as much or more than anybody that's ever been their coach there. If you look at his number of wins during his first, you know, 5 or 6 years there, so and compare it to the previous coaches. So, you know, it always seems to be something going on there, and that was obviously a weird game to start the year. They very easily could be sitting at 4-0 right now, but, you know, Collyn Mond, I think, is sort of settled in as their quarterback. He still is a rookie, you know. He makes some freshman mistakes, but you can see the talent. This is a freshman that was in there for spring practice, so it's not like he's completely brand new to everything. And you know, South Carolina's going to be tested this week, man. A&M, if you look at the recruiting rankings, they consistently are bringing in athletes. This is going to be a fast, athletic team that South Carolina plays. And even though A&M hasn't been great on defense, their defense is still loaded with special athletes. So not an easy matchup for South Carolina.
The Gamecocks have never beaten Texas A&M and are 0-3 against the Aggies since A&M joined the SEC. A&M is now the Gamecocks' permanent West Division opponent. And West, the Gamecocks are battling injuries this week. 2 starting linemen out and, you know, 2 key players, one on both sides of the ball, with Deebo Samuel out again this week and Bryson Allen Williams out with that shoulder. Gamecocks are shorthanded going to College Station.
Yeah, they are. And, you know, I think if we just started a list of the top 5 Gamecocks that they couldn't really afford to lose this year, I think, you know, Deebo Samuel, Zach Bailey, and Bryson Allen Williams would all 3 be on that list, maybe along with probably Sky Moore and Jake Bentley. So I think not only have they had injuries, but it's been key guys, it's been veteran guys that, you know, all were sort of preseason in that all-SEC conversation. So, you know, I think it hurts. Obviously, like Muschamp keeps saying, you know, nobody's going to feel sorry for South Carolina, but it certainly hurts them. You know, they'll also be without Corey Helms this week, their, you know, starting guard. But you know what? I went back, Emerson, I watched Darius Hutcherson, who they actually slid him in at left guard and moved Donnell Stanley over to right guard when Helms got hurt. And I thought the kid played pretty well. That was actually Darius Hutcherson's really first career playing time, and I thought he did an outstanding job. Now, the competition obviously ratchets it up a little bit this week, but you're starting to see, you know, some of these replacements. You saw Ortre Smith have another touchdown catch. That's 2 weeks in a row he's had a touchdown catch. His snaps have gone up from about, you know, maybe 10 or so a game to 40-something this past week. So these guys are going to have to play. They're going to have to go make something happen. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, Daniel Fennell played a bunch more this past week against La Tech. He had a couple of quarterback pressures, his first career sack. And then I even looked at Brad Johnson as a freshman that we talked about a lot in preseason that we haven't seen much of once the season started. I think as this season goes on, look for Brad Johnson to probably see his playing time go up as well, because they're going to need that quick twitch off the edge that Bryce Allen Williams brought to the table.
Wes, one aspect of this game that I think maybe I have not given enough credence to this week is the fact that Muschamp spent so much time at Texas and was the head coach in waiting there, and he's got a reputation among Texas A&M fans. I don't think he's a very popular figure among the Aggies crowd, and, Muschamp has game planned pretty well, at least defensively, against A&M teams that he's faced in years past. So that gives the Gamecocks a little bit of hope?
I think so. Generally, it seems like, for the most part, South Carolina's defenses under Will Muschamp give the Gamecocks a chance, so to speak. You can pick out a couple of games. Obviously, Clemson last year will come to mind where they did. But in a lot of times when we start talking offense and we start thinking, shootouts, Muschamp's defenses find a way to keep South Carolina or keep his team in the game. I went back and looked. Obviously, last year, Texas A&M comes in, pretty high-powered offense. They're held to 24 points. You go back to Muschamp's most recent stay at Auburn. His Auburn defense held A&M to just 10 points, so that was a high-flying, attack from A&M, and Auburn won that game. And then you go back to, I think it was 2012. You got to go a pretty far, back to early in the tenure for Muschamp at Florida, and he held A&M to, I think it was 17 points in a win, and that A&M team ended up averaging like 40 points a game or something insane. So Muschamp has sort of found a way to slow down these A&M offenses. Now, does that mean necessarily that they'll be able to do that later on tonight? I don't know. It's going to be tough. They have athletes across the board. Christian Kirk, to me, this guy's right up there with what Deebo Samuel was for South Carolina. I kept saying over and over, if you kick to Deebo Samuel, you're an idiot. And I think with Christian Kirk, this guy already has, I think, 5 returns for touchdowns in his career. Most of those coming on punt returns, but he returned his first kickoff return for touchdown this year. Anytime you can keep the ball out of Christian Kirk's hands, I think that's a good start for Muschamp and his defensive staff, is to try to keep that guy from beating you.
Yeah, Kirk is going to be a real problem for the Gamecocks, you'd have to believe, tonight. Wes, he had his 6th career return touchdown last weekend against Arkansas, took a kickoff return to the house, and he had 3 touchdowns in that ball game on just 8 touches. He's got 30 games played at Texas A&M, and he scored 26 TDs in those 30 games. So he's up to 4th on the A&M all-time touchdown receiving list, and maybe the most exciting player in the SEC, if not the whole country, Christian Kirk.
Yeah, he's good. And so he had 5 punt returns to touchdown, and then a kickoff return. So like you said, 6 total. I was short him there. That's incredible, man.
Yeah.
And basically has almost, so 26 touchdowns in 30 games means, pretty much if this guy's on the field, there's a pretty good chance he's going to score at least a touchdown each game.
Yeah.
So, I think he's up there with about anybody. Muschamp said that the kid's as good of a football player as there is in the country, and it's hard to argue against that. I look around the country, some of the other playmakers. Maybe a Saquon Barkley, who I think is an absolute freak. But otherwise, you look around the conference, there's not many guys that are as good or as accomplished as this kid. And you know what? They'll move him around, man. I think that's the thing to watch, is how they move him around and get him matched up in different spots. And, the other A&M receivers are actually pretty young. They're not very experienced. Obviously, Kellen Mond isn't very experienced at quarterback either. But Christian Kirk has kind of become the veteran, steady hand of this offensive attack for A&M.
Yeah, the touchdown per touch ratio for Christian Kirk is astounding. 3 touchdowns on just 8 touches against Arkansas. And Wes, he was so lethal as a punt returner that teams quit kicking to him. So Sumlin put him on kickoff return, and he housed one last week against Arkansas. This young man is a threat to score every time he touches the ball.
Yeah, he really is. And, you look at this A&M offense, you look at Kirk, and then you look at their 2 running backs, and, this is probably, Kirk's the guy that probably benefits the most from having the rushing attack that they have. And I think for South Carolina, that's what it's going to go to. Kirk is sort of the guy that tends to, like you said, when most of it. But then those running backs are the guys that are kind of going to be the workhorse for this A&M bunch. Then you have to account for Collyn Mond in the running game as well. He's a quick kid. He's got speed, but he's also got size. So, this is a group that I think not only are they good, but they also can wear you down defensively. Look at South Carolina's defensive depth. That's something we've talked about a lot this year. A&M will run tempo, but they'll also pound the ball on you and just sort of wear you down a little bit with sort of that three-headed monster, two backs and a quarterback. So, they're a good football team. They're especially a good offense. We didn't talk about it in the injury report earlier, but South Carolina does get Stephen Montag back. I think that's worth mentioning because they really had to play about the same five guys all year long. Montag played a bit in the opener, but I think maybe 10, 15 snaps at most. So literally since then, it's been the same five guys. Chris Mons, DJ Smith, Jamarcus King, Rashad Fenton, and Jamias Williams have played the entire game for South Carolina. So you look at those guys and the opportunity to maybe get them a break. Taven Jackson, the freshman cornerback, is finally healthy as well. He'll make the trip. Not sure how much he'll play just because that's a lot to put on him in his first action. But South Carolina does at least maybe get a little bit of help from some added depth defensively in the secondary. And they may be forced to use that and sort of rotate some guys in and out because we haven't talked about tempo this week as much as we did against, we were talking about Missouri a couple of weeks ago, but still that's something very much that this A&M team is all about. We saw that firsthand. I think you go back to, 2014 when A&M came in for that season opener and South Carolina was still fresh off a 3-11 win season. And A&M just tempoed them to death and pretty much started what was the decline of the end of the Spurrier era.
Yeah, getting Stephen Montag back is certainly good news on the injury front this week. Maybe the only good bit of news on the injury front for South Carolina. So it'll certainly help having an extra player back there, a veteran player, a guy that's got some experience on the back end of the defense. But, Wes, clearly the Gamecocks' ability to slow down the A&M running game is going to be key tonight. And I'm amazed at the depth of talent at the skill positions for Texas A&M. This is Kevin Sumlin's sixth year, and that team is loaded at skill positions. Wes, they've got three quarterbacks that they're comfortable playing. They've dealt with some injuries there, but that's what forced Collyn Mond into a starting role. This is a freshman from San Antonio who is a very highly regarded prospect coming out of high school. And good instincts for Mond, Wes. He keeps his eyes downfield. He threw for over 200 yards in that win over Arkansas last week, and he ran for over 100 as well. And he made just his third career start last week against Arkansas. So tonight will be his fourth start. And, at running back as well, Wes, their fourth-string running back had 4 carries for 100 yards last week against Arkansas.
Yeah, and I think when you look at those guys, just the pure combination of size and speed that they bring to that position is very, very impressive. And like I said earlier, man, I mean, these guys recruit as well as anybody. I think there was sort of a sense when the year started that, A&M maybe wasn't near as good as anybody thought they were because they had the big sort of letdown in game one where they let UCLA come back on them, the biggest comeback in like 10 years in college football. And then they've struggled a little bit with some teams that they were supposed to, sort of blow out. But this is still a very, very good football team. And, I think, like you said, their running back stable is very, very impressive. They're going to pound the football. They're going to wear defenses out, like I said earlier. And just a big test for South Carolina. And I think something that I saw against Louisiana Tech from South Carolina's defense that we haven't really seen much of this year is I didn't think the tackling was necessarily very clean. I think South Carolina's tackled pretty well for the most part this season, especially compared to last year. But I think they maybe fell into some bad habits against La Tech. So can they get these guys on the ground? And then, you know what? Rookie quarterback, a guy that's going to probably throw you 2 or 3 balls that are into a danger zone. South Carolina's going to have to complete the turnovers when they have those opportunities because from what I've seen in 4 games for South Carolina, that when South Carolina is able to force turnovers and B, able to capitalize on turnovers. That is, when you have a short field, you go score, then they're very difficult to beat. When they don't do both of those things, you look at Kentucky, South Carolina forced the turnovers, but was not able to capitalize on the short field. You look at La Tech, South Carolina didn't force any short fields. They had to go the length of the field the entire game. Even against a team like La Tech, that made it difficult on them. They were not able to put up a bunch of points. The game got shortened because both teams were sort of having these long, drawn-out drives. And next thing you know, South Carolina almost loses the game because of some sort of mistakes along the way that they weren't able to finish drives. So I think with the young quarterback, Travaris Robinson, Will Muschamp probably going to mix in a couple of things. They'll probably try to give him some looks that he's never seen before, try and force him to make a few errant throws. If you're South Carolina, you got a ball in your hands on one of those plays, you've got to take advantage of it. I think when you look at this game, what is it, Emerson, like a 9-point line right now? That was last time I saw it. Mm-hmm. A&M by 9. So, wow, we all, I guess, talked about La Tech and the near upset here, and the fan base is all upset. But A&M is a bigger favorite over South Carolina this week than South Carolina was over La Tech last week, to put it into perspective. So if South Carolina is going to really make this a football game, I think, to me, you always go to the turnover battle, and that's kind of the great equalizer. South Carolina needs to win this turnover battle by 2 or 3, and then take advantage of those turnovers as well, because like I said, you have a freshman quarterback. This guy's not going to be perfect, but you have to then take advantage of those opportunities.
We figured the Gamecocks will have their hands full with A&M running backs tonight. Williams is the game breaker. We talked earlier this week with Mark Passwaters from AggieYale.com. He said that he thinks Williams could be an All-American and may end up being a first-round pick in the NFL draft. But their number 2 running back, Keith Ford, had touchdown runs of 23 and 44 yards last week against Arkansas. And I mentioned they've got a couple of other backs that they're very comfortable with. Their 4th stringer had 4 carries for over 100 yards in that Arkansas game last week. Game Day here on Gamecock Central Radio. It's our Game Day podcast. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. Glad to have you along. We hope you've downloaded the Gamecock Central Radio app. We've got this free phone app that allows you to listen to our podcast on your cell phone or mobile device. You can download it on the App Store and on Google Play. Subscribe to our podcast. Search for Gamecock Central Radio on iTunes, SoundCloud, and other popular services, or just visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. And we're going to go to the Gamecock Central hotline here in just a moment. We've set up this new phone line that allows you to call in and be a part of our podcast here on GCR. The number is 803-497-9058. 497-9058, the Gamecock Central hotline. You can call in, leave a question about Gamecock football or an upcoming opponent, and Wes Mitchell and Chris Clark will answer your questions on a future edition of Gamecock Central Radio. We'll play the recording of your voice on a future podcast. So, Wes, let's talk about Gamecock offense for a moment. We talked extensively about the A&M offense, high-powered. They figured to be in position to score a lot of points tonight, provided they don't turn the football over. And let's talk about the Gamecock offense now. Shut out for 3 quarters last week against Louisiana Tech. Wes, I know A&M's defense has struggled, but I've got to believe that their defense is much more athletic and bigger than Louisiana Tech. So what reason is there to believe that the Gamecocks are going to be able to move the football tonight? How much of last week's struggles do you think are attributable to the fact that it was the first game without Deebo Samuel? Deebo had been so important through the first 3 weeks of the season, and the Gamecocks didn't have him last week. Wes, how much of a factor was that?
Yeah, I think there is a semblance of that to what happened. And, I think the answer to that first part of that question is that, every game, Steve Spurrier always said every game stands on its own merit. So, can they possibly turn around and play much better than they did last week? I think so. You look at the first 2 weeks of the year, and everybody felt really good about South Carolina 2-0 against 2 what we thought were pretty good teams. Come to find out, Missouri's not a very good team. NC State actually is a pretty darn good team, I think. So South Carolina probably wasn't as good as we thought they were after those first 2. They're probably not quite as bad as some people think they are after these last 2. But certainly I think the offense is going to have to execute better. I know a lot of fans have put that on Kurt Roper, the offensive coordinator, and put it on play calling. I don't necessarily put it on play calling, but I think at the end of the day, you're getting to the point 4 or 5 weeks into the year where, it is on the offensive staff to put the offense in a position to, or ultimately what I'm trying to say is that the success or non-success of the offense ultimately does fall on the shoulders of the offensive staff. So I think they have to look at what they can continue to do to put those guys in a position to execute better, because to me, it hasn't necessarily really been the play calling. It's been more the execution, because you look at the game against La Tech, South Carolina had 9 offensive possessions. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The fact that the game was shortened. Both sides are using a very methodical style of offense, and you don't have many turnovers. You don't have any short fields. Not many 3 and outs either. So both sides are just possessing the ball the entire game. You have 9 offensive possessions. South Carolina only punted on 2 of those possessions, and they scored on 3 of those possessions. So then the other 4 possessions were actually negated by 2 missed field goals, an interception, and a fumble, and then you had a missed throw on a 3rd down, and you had a bad snap. So you go through all the drives in the game, and you can kind of see exactly what went wrong to throw those drives off. So when you have plays that are open but are missed, to me that goes back to execution. Ultimately, execution falls on the coaches to put the guys in a position to execute. I know everybody wants to see more plays and different type of plays. When a team fails to execute consistently, Emerson, I actually kind of go the opposite direction. I wonder if they don't, at times, with a bunch of new guys out there, need to simplify a little bit more, because you have guys open, you have plays that are open, and you don't necessarily execute it. The difference in it being correct and incorrect can be, a matter of 6 inches. The way you hone in those 6 inches is repetition, doing the same thing over and over. If you simplify the playbook and you do those things more consistently in practice, it's going to translate to the football field.
Wes, Gamecock running back Tyson Williams got 0 carries in the win over NC State to open the year. He came back the following week. Gamecocks got him 14 carries and led the team in rushing. The next week, 0 carries against Kentucky. Despite the fact that he was on the field for 21 plays, he didn't get a single carry. So last week, the Gamecocks fed him the football, and he led the team in rushing again and scored that big touchdown in the fourth quarter that helped lead the Gamecocks' comeback. So has Tyson Williams entrenched himself in the Gamecock offensive game plan at this point? I got to believe he's going to get carries every week the rest of the year, provided he's healthy, Wes.
Oh, yeah. I think right now he's the guy. He got the start this past week. He was able to take advantage of that, especially in the first quarter. I thought they made a concerted effort to get him the football and establish the run. And then, in the fourth quarter, he came up with that big touchdown run as well, where he hit the hole really hard. And I think what you've seen from Tyson's 2 sort of big second-half runs, one at Missouri and one against La Tech this past week, is that I think his vision and his feel for the game maybe gets a little bit better as his number of carries goes up. Jake Bentley mentioned this week how they had a very similar play on with a very similar hole that Tyson sort of hesitated into the hole early in the game. Well, then late in the game, there's a big hole. He explodes through it, gets to the second level, outruns the defense, and scores a touchdown that really helped South Carolina win the game this past week. So I think you have to make a concerted effort to get him the football. And, Emerson, there will probably be times where South Carolina is unable to run the ball tonight, but I think you almost have to be a little bit stubborn. It's going to get frustrating to watch as a fan at times if you're listening, but sometimes, even if you're only getting 1-2 yards a carry, you have to keep running the ball just to kind of keep the other team a little bit honest. You have to keep chopping wood. So I think for South Carolina tonight, get Tyson Williams the football, and even when it's not going well, maybe keep feeding him the football and then hope that he can kind of chip away as the game goes along. But if you're going to do that, when they have these opportunities for these other plays and they have these open passing routes, South Carolina's going to have to hit those on a little bit higher clip than they have so far this year. To me, the word is efficiency. They got to be a little bit more efficient on offense if they're going to have success.
Wes, the Gamecocks' problems in the place-kicking game evident at this point. South Carolina has really struggled to make field goals at times this year, but Parker White did make the game winner last week. So do you think White, after making that kick, his confidence is up now? Maybe the Gamecocks will be at least an average kicking team moving forward, or maybe, White's confidence is shot up after the game winner, and the Gamecocks will be more consistent in a field goal game?
Yeah, I think that was a huge kick for him, man. He missed some kicks early on, but a lot of his kicks were long. You're asking the guy to hit deep field goals,
yeah.
And those are sort of low percentage in the first place, and it's not like he just missed the ball on a lot of these and kicked it very errant. He's had some very near misses. I was very happy for the kid personally, just because I think if you boo a college walk-on kicker, then you're absolutely like scum of the earth. Personally, like if you're booing a kid who's a walk-on who is just doing the best he can, then you should really just leave the game. Like, I don't really care if you paid for your ticket. Like, that's crap. So for the kid to go out there and hit the game winner, to me was pretty awesome for him. I know he had to be completely nervous. I know anybody would have been in that situation, but I think that gives him a little bit of confidence moving forward. And the kid's got a great leg. I think everybody can see that. Like, the ball comes off his foot explosively. Like, if the ball goes a long way, it's not a low line drive like some kickers have. Like, the ball has a good trajectory. He hits it pretty smoothly. I think he just needed to see something good happen. Obviously, it'll be a little bit different this week on the road, Texas A&M. But hey, he's probably not going to get booed this weekend. So maybe he can get a little bit of confidence going.
All right, Wes, a couple other items to get to here today. We're going to go to the Gamecock Central hotline in just a moment, and I'd like to talk with you about Kevin Sumlin a little bit as well. But first, let me be candid with you, Wes. Coming into this game, clearly Texas A&M has not been a good matchup for South Carolina. A&M's beaten the Gamecocks 3 straight, and it's just a team that the Gamecocks have not matched up well with for whatever reason. A&M is very talented, very skilled, and a big offensive and defensive line. They've had quality players, number 1 pick in the NFL draft last year, and A&M's been good. Manziel won the Heisman there a few years ago, so A&M's been a quality program that has given the Gamecocks a lot of problems. Coming into the game, Wes, I thought this would be a trouble game for South Carolina. Playing on the road, obviously, 12th man at Kyle Field is going to be a problem for South Carolina. That's if the Gamecocks are at 100% health-wise, Wes. And the fact is they're not even close to 100% health-wise. And that's cause for concern for me, Wes. I think the Gamecocks, are facing a tall order tonight with no Debo, no Bryson Allen-Williams, and Zach Bailey and Corey Helms out, plus, other assorted injuries here and there. I just think it's a tall order tonight, Wes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough, man. They've sort of circled the wagons in practice this week and taken a kind of us against the world. Change the narrative has been a phrase that I've heard has sort of permeated practice this week because they want to change the narrative about what this football team is right now. And, I think all of that is good and well, but then at the end of the day, it's all about matchups and execution on the football field. Like you said, it is a tough matchup for South Carolina. But at the same time, to me, I kind of look at it as a nothing to lose type situation. Nobody's really expecting them to win this game. They did drop one to Kentucky that a lot of people thought they would win. So we all said at the time there's going to be several opportunities for them to maybe steal one back. This is just one of those opportunities. Big picture, I think if they could somehow find a way to split the next two at A&M, Arkansas at home next week, then that puts them in really, really good shape moving forward. So, and you know what, Emerson, I've been following and covering South Carolina athletics for long enough. It just doesn't feel like whenever there's a little bit too much hype about the Gamecocks, they tend to disappoint. And then whenever literally no one's counting on them, they tend to find a way to at least steal a game or two. It wouldn't surprise me to see them go down there, maybe not win the game, but surprise people and play really well. They were completely outmanned by A&M 2 years ago with an interim coach. And Perry Orth goes down there and has a huge first quarter against those guys and had that like 70-something yard run and South Carolina nearly pulled off the upset and only lost 35-28 in that game. You never know what can happen in college football. That's what makes it a beautiful game. So I'm excited just to see what these guys can do. It's an opportunity for them. If they lose, then nobody's going to bat an eye. But if they get on there and find a way to win, then all of a sudden they're right back on schedule. So, but I do think, to me, and I'm really, some people will listen and it'll go in one ear out the other. I'm not saying it as an excuse. I'm really not. So, like Muschamp said, nobody's going to feel sorry for South Carolina. But
sure.
I think if you had a Deebo Samuel, and obviously a Bryson Williams, Zach Bailey as well, but the game-breaking ability of Deebo to possibly keep South Carolina in games like this, then maybe you're talking about a little different conversation. Not that South Carolina would be favored; they would, but I think the explosiveness, the opportunity for those big plays that change games. Deebo he brings that to the table, and without that, you lose that element. So I think that's just a huge loss for South Carolina. But that opens the window to maybe an Ortre Smith or a Shi Smith, or we saw Brian Edwards go make a few more plays this past week. So it's an opportunity for the next guy to step up and start making a name for himself.
Yeah, it's not like the Gamecocks are bereft of talent with Deebo out, and South Carolina's only played the one game without Deebo, but clearly the offense just wasn't the same without Deebo Samuel last week. And I'm still interested to see, what the Gamecocks are going to do to try to make big plays on offense now that Deebo is not available. And, Wes, another thing I'm interested to see is the continued progression or development of Collyn, the quarterback for A&M. This guy has only made 3 starts, and he played a hell of a ball game last week against Arkansas. So will he continue to progress, or will he take a step back at some point? How good is this kid going to be? He's shown tremendous potential, and I think he's maybe the best QB in the conference that people aren't talking about right now, and that's because he's new. He's just a freshman, but he's been very impressive in the short time that he's been on the field for A&M. So what's Collyn going to do tonight, and how are the Gamecocks going to combat him or counter him tonight? One of the interesting angles to tonight's ball game. And, Wes, another angle that I want to talk about with you is the Kevin Sumlin situation. Sumlin, since he lost to UCLA, A&M blew a 44-10 lead. UCLA came back and beat him 45-44, and Sumlin was considered to be on the hot seat going into that game before the season even started. And then when they blew that huge lead against UCLA, the temperature under his seat has only gone up dramatically. And I get the impression that a lot of folks in College Station just don't care for Kevin Sumlin personally. Now, part of it's football. Don't get me wrong. They went 8-5 last year. They have invested $500 million into their football program, stadium improvements, facilities upgrades, you name it. And they went 8-5 last year. That's not the kind of return that I think A&M boosters, big money people, expect on that kind of investment. So for whatever reason, Wes, Sumlin seems to have fallen out of favor, at least in certain circles among the A&M fan base.
Yeah, he has, and you look, I thought it was a very interesting piece, and I can't remember which paper it was, but that talked to Eric Hyman. I think that was last week, and he, of course, former Gamecocks AD, former Texas A&M AD, and he talked about the political nature of Texas A&M athletics, and the fact that A&M just threw all sort of, I think probably a little bit prematurely, threw all this money at Kevin Sumlin and huge buyouts and all this stuff because they were worried about maybe somebody else coming in and stealing them, I guess. And now you sort of just have I guess unrest is probably the word that I would go to. And it's not just at A&M, man. I look around the SEC. How many fan bases right now are truly happy? It ain't many of them. Like, the Alabama fans are just spoiled, but they should be happy to an extent. But you look around, you look at, dude, South Carolina has gotten a defensive coordinator fired because Missouri fired their DC right after that game. They got a chance to get someone fired this week. Brett Bielema's feet will get hotter next week.
Yeah.
And then, man, Butch Jones has been needing ice for 3 years. So Butch, if Butch loses in South Carolina for the second straight year, and is a guy that just inevitably has not shown he can beat Will Muschamp at all, South Carolina has a chance to really warm up some SEC hot seats in the coming month or so.
Yeah, interesting that Sumlin was very popular when they had Johnny Manziel, and they were winning a lot of football games, and now
funny how that works.
Yeah, right. And now, it was just 2 or 3 years ago, Wes, that people were talking about Sumlin could become a head coach in the NFL. I remember he was mentioned in connection with a couple of NFL openings, 2 or 3 years ago, and now he came into 2017 on the hot seat, and the loss to UCLA really compounded that for him. And Wes, if the Gamecocks beat A&M tonight, Sumlin may not make it through the end of the week.
he really might not, and I think, like I said, man, they're going to have the opportunity against several coaches on the hot seat. So, if you're Sumlin, you might almost wish this was more of like a pick'em type game. No coach wants to see that 9 up there as far as the spread goes, and then possibly lose. So, that, and I've really struggled, Emerson, to be honest, to make a pick for this game because A&M has the better athletes. Of that, I am sure. But this A&M team, man, they have just at times found a way to mess up a good thing, to mess up a good situation. I mean, how many teams in any level of football can say they've blown a 44-10 lead? I mean, that's insane. So, can A&M get out of its own way and win this game, or does South Carolina find a way to hang around? If the Gamecocks find a way to hang around and that confidence just goes up and goes up, then I'm at the point, Emerson, where I don't bet against the Gamecocks because this team, if anything, they're been a little bit overmatched at times. They're not the most talented team in the conference right now by any means, but they have a true competitor at quarterback in Jake Bentley, and I think the character of this South Carolina team is one that's not going to lay down. They keep fighting to the end. I thought that was, as ugly as it was, that was a character-building win over La Tech. So I'm curious to see how they go out and play. If they don't turn the football over and they make A&M actually beat them, then I think they can hang around in this game.
All right, South Carolina, an 8 or 8.5 point underdog, depending on where you look, and the total right now is at 49.5. So, Wes, I'm curious to know, is this going to be a shootout tonight? Neither team's defense has been lights out, although the Gamecocks are improved defensively. Muschamp said earlier this week that A&M is the most explosive offense that South Carolina will have faced to date here in 2017. So, it could be another high-scoring affair, particularly if the Gamecocks are able to find some consistency on offense and a little bit more identity than they had last week versus Louisiana Tech without Deebo Samuel. If the Gamecocks play a little better on offense tonight and have a little bit more sense of purpose and what they're going to do with the football, who they're going to pass to, and that type of thing, we could see a shootout tonight. And on that note, let's go to the Gamecock Central hotline, 803-497-9058. We got our first call of the day and a question about tonight's game against Texas A&M.
Hello, I am Robert Youngson, Jr., and my questions that I might have is, now that we have Louisiana Tech out of the way, how do you think we will face against Texas A&M? In my opinion, I think it'll be all offensive game because of A&M last week, because their defense looked like they didn't play well versus Arkansas. That's my question. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the phone call, Robert. What do you think, Wes? What kind of game can we expect tonight?
Yeah, I keep going back to, and maybe it's just because the numbers are in my head from looking over this series, but I keep thinking low 30s to high 20s is what kind of comes to my head. I'm going to pick A&M, but I guess that puts it over on that over/under you mentioned. But I wouldn't, this day and age, I wouldn't call 35-28, a shootout. I think South Carolina can maybe force a field goal or two, maybe a turnover or two, and keep this game close. Like I said, the thing I go back to is that for whatever reason, some way, somehow, the South Carolina defense tends to find a way to keep South Carolina in games. So I don't foresee A&M just hammering them. And again, I go back to a freshman quarterback. These guys, Muschamp and T-Rob, are as good in the country at finding little details defensively to try and maybe throw a wrinkle here, a wrinkle there. I think they'll have something for mind to try to get him into a couple of issues and maybe a turnover here, a turnover there, if South Carolina can take advantage of it. So that to me is sort of the underlying, like you mentioned earlier, the fact this Mon kid, can he continue to get better? The underlying part of that is, can Muschamp T-Rob maybe find something that he's not seen, or a little wrinkle defensively that puts him in a position to not play as well, or to make a big mistake or two. Now, we say all that, South Carolina still has to go out there and be able to put enough pressure on this kid to force him into those mistakes.
All right, let's check in with Mark Passwaters. He joined us earlier this week on Gamecock Central Radio. Good podcast up right now on GCR on the Texas A&M perspective. If you want more information on the Texas A&M angle coming into the game, you can listen to that podcast with Mark Passwaters from AggieYell.com. And Mark joins us right now for Texas A&M's keys to victories tonight.
3 keys to victory for A&M. 1, stay balanced. Run the football. That's what they did well last year at Carolina when Trevor Knight kind of struggled. They've got the running game to do it. They need to keep the pressure off of Collyn Mond. If they can do that, then they're in good shape. 2, they need to get pressure on Jake Bentley. If Bentley has time, A&M secondary has been awful so far. It's 120th in the nation. You saw what Josh Rosen did to it. They gave up, an ungodly amount of yards in the fourth quarter to Austin Allen last weekend. The opportunities will be there to get big plays if A&M does not get pressure on Bentley. And 3, finish. This has been the problem for A&M for several years now. We saw it against UCLA. They struggled with it again against Arkansas. There's a history of letting off the gas in the fourth quarter. They have to close things out, not only just to win this game, but to prove to themselves that they can do it, because they're going to need to finish, or at least be able to put up a solid fight in the next couple of weeks as they go to Gainesville, and, of course, when they play Alabama at Kyle Field.
That's Mark Passwaters from AggieYell.com giving us Texas A&M's keys. And we'll now send it over to Collyn Taylor, staff writer for Gamecock Central. Collyn's got Gamecock keys to victory tonight.
So, obviously, South Carolina, it's a huge test for them this week. Texas A&M runs the ball about as well as anybody, not only in the SEC, but in the country. And Gamecocks have had a hard time stopping the run this season. Collyn Mond's a very good quarterback, and they got a lot of guys that can do some damage in big plays. I think that's going to be a huge key. If South Carolina can stop Texas A&M's big play offense, then I think they have a shot. And obviously they have to be able to run the ball. Then they're going to have to put up some points. So have the run, set the pass, and then from there, I think that the offense is really going to start clicking on all cylinders. I think it's a tough matchup for South Carolina just because Texas A&M does the things well that South Carolina doesn't defend well. So it's going to be a test. But I think if they can run the ball to set up the pass and stop A&M's run game, I think that's going to be the 2 biggest things for South Carolina this week.
There you have it, Wes. Gamecock keys to victory tonight from our staff writer, Collyn Taylor. It's going to be an interesting ball game. Wes, I feel like the Gamecocks have nothing to lose tonight with the injury situation, particularly. Nobody's picking South Carolina to win tonight. They are a decided underdog against A&M, and A&M's had problems defensively, and if they're not as sharp offensively as they've been the last couple of weeks, they could have some problems tonight. So the Gamecocks have everything to gain, nothing to lose.
Yeah, exactly. That's it, man. They have to go play like that. I think at times South Carolina has played a bit tight. I think the last 2 games compared to the first 2, I thought they played very loose and executed in the first 2 games. They haven't necessarily done that these last 2. In a weird way, maybe going on the road with nothing to lose and everything to gain kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. So I'm excited to see what happens. I think it could end up being a pretty decent football game. And like I said, if they could hang around into the fourth quarter and shorten this game, then anything can happen from that point.
All right, good stuff, Wes. We appreciate you joining us on the Gamecock Central Game Day podcast once again. 7:30 kickoff tonight on the SEC Network. The Gamecocks are in College Station to take on Texas A&M. Thanks very much, Wes.
All right, thanks, man. Have a good one.
That's Wes Mitchell. I'm Emerson Phillips. I want to send along our thanks to Collyn Taylor and Mark Passwaters. Mark is with AggieYell.com, and my name's Emerson Phillips. We appreciate you joining us here on the GCR Game Day podcast.